Thank you very much. Good morning, and thanks for joining me. I'll be honest with you, I'm kind of sad coming into this conversation because I don't see any happiness in what we're going to discuss. And what we're going to talk about is Syria. And it pains me because I've seen this happen again and again. So what do I mean? I'm 49 now. I've seen Afghanistan totally wrecked. You know, I was there. My parents were from Pakistan. I was born in Scotland, but we went out to Pakistan when I was a young kid in the 80s and early 90s. I saw all the Afghan refugees in Pakistan and the border areas. I saw the problems that came about. I saw the turmoil within Pakistan. I saw the Islamic radicalization in Pakistan. You know, my mom, when she was in her teens, you know, she wore a scarf, but she wore a short little tunic. She had trousers. You know, but now, you know, Pakistan is all hijab. Like, and my mom goes back and goes, I don't recognize my country. The hijab was never worn in Pakistan. But Afghanistan and that war totally changed Pakistan and Afghanistan, ruined thousands and hundreds of thousands of people's lives, killed lots of people, brought about terrorism. So many people in Pakistan dying now of Islamic terrorism. People don't realize this. Bombs are blowing up, left, right, and center. It's not a safe country anymore. But then I saw again in Iraq. Iraq was this functioning society. Now, I'm not a fan of Saddam Hussein. I'm not saying that. He went to war with Iran at the behest of the Americans. He's not a nice guy. But there was civil order. There was stability in Iraq. And the minorities were protected, the Christians. And now, well, some would say not the Kurds. But now, you know, what's happened to Iraq? It's, you know, the Kurds are in the north, the Shiites are now ruling, but all the Christians, a lot of them left. There is no stability. All the intelligentsia, the intelligent people in Iraq went off to America and Europe. And Iraq is broken. It's still conquered. It's got American bases. It had ISIS come over, try and take over. I mean, it's just destabilization, turmoil, bombings, killings. It's just horrible. Then the same happened to Libya, the jewel of Africa, place where you had no income tax, you had free health, free water, everything you ever want, education. Completely failed state, backward state where there's open slave markets. And now in the Middle East, this ancient civilization, one of the oldest countries, continuous countries in the world, rich in history, pre-Hellenic, then Greek and Iranian, Persian, and then Arab. I mean, it goes on, multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious, a beautiful tapestry, mosaic of civilization with Christians, Orthodox Christians, dating back from the origin of Christ, you know, Christianity, Muslims, Alawites, Kurds, whatever, now being run essentially by a terrorist outfit. Galani, the leader, was one of the guys who was in Al-Qaeda, who was in ISIS, who was then in Al-Nusra. And now, you know, they keep having these rebranding. And now, because he's had a bit of a haircut, lost a turban, and put on a suit, he's now being welcomed. This head chopper is being welcomed as, you know, the West's, like, friend. Dude, what the frack is going on? What's going on?
Actually, what is going on? You can't even answer what is going on because it's a multi-layered strategy that doesn't make sense from our point of view because we think that the so-called civilized world wants us as well in our region to live in a civilized way. And this is something that is many people miss and they don't really understand the priorities of the people. So what is the priority of 24 million Syrians? Is it a democracy or is it stability? Like if you listen to some talking head in Washington, D.C., who is on the payroll of think tank, and this think tank is funded by the taxpayer money or the government agencies, they will tell you, no, you need democracy and before stability, but you cannot build a state without stability. So in my opinion, this is it shouldn't be controversial to say that we need stability more than democracy. And what is a democracy at the end of the day? Is it elections? Is it the rule of law? Is it the respect of the people's rights? Are all people equal? If that is democracy, then what they have done in Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria or Libya, they didn't bring democracies to these countries, because this is the opposite of democracy, where it's, first of all, it's unstable. Second of all, you don't have state institutions that can guarantee the establishment of a democratic state or a democratic system in the country. And thirdly, they have lost their sovereignties. I don't see any I would say, like, why would we discuss about democracy when we don't have our grip over our natural resources, when outside powers already are looting our oil and wheat and other, let's say, minerals in the country? So this is where the role of the media comes. The media is so powerful nowadays, and you're very aware of this during Corona, how they hypnotized hundreds of millions of people, basically. So on a smaller scale, in a Syrian society, where you can psyop basically the people into believing that they have to get rid of their dictator, and because once he's gone, then every other problem that you have will be solved. So you start encouraging the people to go against the government, and once you see that the protests cannot really take down a government, so you encourage them to carry arms, you dump tens of billions of dollars worth of weapons into the hands of the wrong people. So this is something people need to understand, because every society has probably like 3% of psychopaths. And if you give 3% of psychopaths, if you give in any society, if you give these 3% weapons, then you will wreck the entire society. Like in 100%. The United States, in the UK, it's not only about Islam or non-Islamic groups, but once you give these weapons to people who have no issue with killing, and they're using religion as their motivation to pursue these, their, I would say, theocratic aspirations, which has nothing to do with democracy, right? Then you will have the result is what happened in Syria. But the scandal here is that once the regime change was successful and Galani came to power, you see all of a sudden the US officials, British officials, German officials, French officials, and all these governments who said that their priority is democracy in Syria, they visited Damascus now, and they opened their embassies once again, and they shook hands with the founder of the Al-Qaeda offshoot in Syria. Yesterday, I watched a video of Galani, and this was very interesting. This was, I think, from the year... this was a long time ago, and he's speaking about his time when he was watching the Second Intifada in Palestine. So the Second Intifada, this was also the time when I was more, let's say, involved in the watching what's happening, let's say, in Palestine, and this has motivated me. He was the same, but back then I didn't go to Iraq and blew up people. This is what Galani did. Galani saw what's happening in Palestine. According to him, this has motivated him, which is the wrong motivation. But instead of going and helping his Palestinian brothers and sisters in a just armed struggle, no, he chose to go to Iraq, and then he chose to send car bombs into residential areas, basically blowing up Iraqis. And this was the time when there was legitimate Iraqi resistance against the Americans, right, in Iraq. So the Americans want to divide and conquer. So what would they do? This is something that many people do not really see through, because it's difficult. You really need to do lots of research to understand what the Americans do. They don't come and give these Al-Qaeda types weapons and ammunition in their hands, but they have allies in the region. For example, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has been the same power which gave weapons and training and assistance and money to what they called the Mujahideen in Afghanistan in late 70s and early 80s, which led to the creation of Al-Qaeda and Taliban rule in Afghanistan. And this had repercussions also on your country because the training camps and lots of the logistics were set up back then in Pakistan by the Saudi intelligence and the CIA. So the similar example happened in Iraq in 2003. The Americans said, there is a lot of resistance against us. We have to divide them. So the Saudis come. Saudis start funneling money and weapons into the hands of the Al-Qaeda elements, the radical elements in Iraq. And Al-Qaeda doesn't go and fight the Americans, but rather fights the Shiites. So they go and send car bombs into the Shia-dominated, let's say, neighborhoods in order to cause civil war. So this didn't come from just normal Sunni people against their Shia brothers, but rather from a very radical element inside the Iraqi society, including multinational jihadists coming to Iraq. And this was led by al-Jolani in Iraq. So he did the American bidding in Iraq long time ago. He has been an asset for the Americans long time ago, and then ended up in an American jail, just like other terrorists end up for some time in an American jail, and then they free them. They free them when it's convenient for them to free them again. And Jolani came to Syria and he established the Al-Qaeda, and he waged this, let's say, regime change against Damascus, and he was successful. The Americans always considered him as an asset. The former American special envoy to Syria, James Shefri, he said Jolani's army has been an asset for the U.S. strategy in Syria. So everybody knows who is behind this group, and in this case, they are the Americans and their allies.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot I want to ask you. There's so much I want to talk about. I'm going to talk about Galani very quickly, but I then want to talk about Syria, please.
Yeah.
So Galani, my understanding is his name comes from Golani, like the Golan Heights, and actually it's not really a Syrian name. No one knows where he comes from. No one knows his childhood, his lineage. He's a bit of a strange character. He is the ultimate asset, and even though he went to jail, I don't think that means anything. That just gives him a reputation that, you know what, he's a trusted character. I mean, who knows what happened when he was in jail? He might have actually been in a training camp. He might have been indoctrinated. He might have been being informed what his next mission is. We don't know what was going on. All we know is, apparently he went to jail under the Americans, and that gives him street cred. It gives him street credibility. Oh, he's one of us. Look, he went to jail. That means jack to me. No, I mean, the funny thing is he's got a very dodgy background and no one seems to know where he comes from. And now apparently he's even changing his name. I'm very suspicious of people who come with different names. Am I right about this?
Yes, and actually in this case, the other day I was watching a podcast and one of the guests quoted Ali bin Abi Talib, the fourth caliph of Islam. And he predicted the phenomenon of ISIS and these Al-Qaeda types. And the prediction in this case is very difficult to understand. If you read it in English, you need to understand between the lines. And now I'm just going to give you the explanation of this quote from Ali bin Abi Talib. So he basically warned about a future group of people who will appear under black flags. And he advised that when they come, it's best to stay out of their way and not get involved. These people will be strong in appearance, but will lack true integrity. They will make promises, but not keep them. They will claim to follow the truth, but they won't actually represent it. They will adopt names that sound important or respectable, using titles like Abu, which means father in Arabic, and identifying with various regions or villages. And in this case, Jolani comes from the Golan Heights, and Baghdadi comes from Baghdad. So, and he says their appearance will be unusual, with long hair like women. Eventually, they will split and fight among themselves, and the truth will emerge, guided by Allah. So this was a prophecy almost 1600 or 1500 years ago by Ali bin Abi Talib, predicting that such a phenomenon will happen. And I think such a phenomenon happened in the history of Islam. So we have to speak about Islam as a religion, and then Islam as a religion which is being weaponized for political power, right? This is the problem in the region that we always discuss. Like, we want to establish secular systems and reject theocracies, because once you bring religion into the political discourse, it will definitely abuse the rights of the others. Because if you are part of a religion, if I'm a Christian Orthodox, right, I believe that my religion is the correct one. If I have the absolute truth on my side, then all other political parties are not on the right side, because God cannot be wrong. So if you bring Islam or Christianity or any other religion, like for example, what they're doing in Palestine nowadays, they're also using the religious scripts, the Zionists, right, in order to justify what they're doing to the Palestinians. So if God is on your side, the others are the enemies of God, right? So this is very dangerous in the Middle East, to bring religion into political discourse. And this has been encouraged by imperial powers, because they want to keep the people in their place. And they want them to stay in their backward positions, because then they are only consumers. If you don't produce, you're a consumer. There is no other way of seeing it. Just like on social media, 90% of people are consuming content and not creating content, right? So they're using, me and you, still trying to use social media in our benefit. We're producing content for people. But most people are just scrolling and watching and consuming. And this is the same thing in any economic situation in the region. They want to keep the people as hypnotized as possible. They loot their natural resources, and then they sell them products to buy. And people think that they have become more developed and there is a welfare now because they can afford a car or they can afford a smartphone. But this is not development. Development means that if I'm using this smartphone in my hands, I am building this smartphone in my country. Or if I'm driving a car, I am building this car in my country. And this has been the problem of the Americans with Syria, and the Turks with Syria, and the Israelis with Syria. I will give you a very quick example. So Syria before 2011, which means before 1 year before the war started against Syria, the number of the tourists to Syria exceeded 8.5 million people.
Wow.
So the entire Syria is 24 million, and you had in 1 year 8.5 million tourists in Syria, which means the touristic sector was very active and revived in the country. And this was a local touristic sector. So we didn't have all these big brands investing in the shores in Syria or building all these big hotels. No, those were local hotels and local investors who created a very nice, let's say, or touristic sector for the Arabic and Western tourists to come to Syria.
I was potentially going to be one of them. I remember thinking about going to Syria and visiting it, and all the Roman architecture and ancient civilization. Yeah, I really wanted to go, and the food, the weather.
Yes. Actually, I was in Paris in 2009 and 2010 studying there in Sciences Po, and I had a friend there. She was very pro-Palestine. She visited Palestine one time, and she got really touched by what's happening in Palestine. And then I told her a lot about Syria. And once I was there, I finished my studies. She came with me to Syria to visit the country, and she was like fascinated. 2 weeks in Syria, she never wanted to go back to her own country. And back then, the annual GDP of Syria was $60 billion. And Syria had industrial zones. Like in Aleppo, we had 4 or 5 industrial zones, and they started competing with Turkey. So they produce clothing, they produce all sorts of technological products in the country, like water pumps, building, even assembling cars, right, in Aleppo. And this creates a competition with Turkey. And in Syria is cheaper as the materials to produce these things, so the products were cheaper than in Turkey. So this was a dangerous situation that Turkey started investing in these radical groups in order to destroy the industrial zones in the country. So we have to understand that the war was about the independence of Syria, so and the development. This is where nowadays my colleagues call me from Syria, and they say, yeah, but now at least we will have Qatari investment, we will have Saudis funneling money, Turks, Americans, everybody is coming. This can't be bad, right? Like, they're coming, but they're investing their money in our country. This is not our factories.
Yeah, okay, Kevork. I mean, look, there's so much to talk about, but the thing is, this reinforces my belief that most people just don't understand. And most people are so ignorant and so easily manipulated that they do the bidding of the enemy. I've talked about this in the past. You know, the people at the top might be about 8,000 people. They can't actually do all the evil that's in this planet. Most of the evil that's done in this planet is by the majority of us so-called good people, innocent people, being hoodwinked, deceived, and doing harm to ourselves and our neighbors and our families and our countries and our communities. It's an absolute disaster. And you're right. You know, like, oh, I got a phone. Yeah, but like, at what expense? You're now, like you said, a consumer. You're not a producer. And you talked about social media. Kevork, it's not 90%. 99.5, 99.9% of people are consumers, not producers.
Yes.
Now, going back, I think what's happened in Syria is multifactorial. The gains are always multifactorial. The angles are always more than one reason. And so, you know, after 9/11, you know, Wesley Clark, you know, was told, oh, they're going to hit 7 countries or bomb Yemen, Afghanistan, Libya, you know, Sudan, Syria, Iran. And he was like, what they got to do with anything? And the reality is, it's always more than one reason. And the way I look at it is geopolitical, financial, power control. So,
yes.
You know, Syria has its vested interest. It wants more territory. It wants to knock out Syria. Israel wants to make sure Syria is never a competition to it. It's never a threat to it. It's going to take more of the Golan Heights and the land. It wants to see a weakened, balkanized Syria. That will serve its interest, maybe even a greater Israel at some point. Qatar loves what's going on because it can sell its gas through Saudi Arabia, through Jordan, through Syria, into Turkey, into Europe. And therefore, Saudi Arabia will love that.
Yes.
And these Sunni countries, monarchies, these despot regimes do not want to see a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, secular, tolerant society because it shows up as a mirror their ugly societies, their monotheistic, radicalized, tyrannical, family-led things. So they don't want that kind of Syria. They want a mirror of themselves. They want an ugly Frankenstein monster that they've created that mirrors them. So a fanatical regime like them. So Syria also will profit from the pipeline. Jordan is like a puppet to Israel and America. It will profit from the pipeline. Turkey will profit from the pipeline. They can also squeeze out Russia. Russia gas doesn't come into Europe. Russia gets weakened. Everyone's a winner. America is happy because Israel's happy. America's happy because Russia's poorer. I mean, like, this is what I mean. It's multifactorial. Turkey has aspirations to make a greater Turkey empire and all its Turkic nations in Central Asia, support Azerbaijan, weaken Armenia, weaken the Christians and the Kurds. So it's going to go into Syria, take its land, knock off a competitor, control the Kurds. I mean, it goes on and on and on. It's multifactorial. And I'm sure I've missed a few points, but do you not agree that this is what's going on?
I just want to reiterate on the people. Because how is it possible that like me and you, we know all these things, right? But it took us time to learn. But we invested time to learn. And why did we invest this time? Because we were really motivated for the good. Like, we wanted the best for the people. Like, otherwise, why would we put our faces on camera and try to speak and try to educate? It's dangerous. It's dangerous. People need to understand to put your face and your real name and try to educate the masses against the tyrannical, small, like this elite that trying to subjugate the people. This is not only about the Syrian people. This is not only about the Pakistani people. They want to subjugate, and they successfully did. the entire universe. They made a universe revolve around consumerism. People are just consuming either data or consuming food or consuming products. They're just buying things and filling the pockets of these people. Their motivation is money and dominance. So people really have to wake up to the fact that they don't have our best interests in their heart. And we are the majority. But we are asleep. But by choice.
Yeah.
This is by choice. So the evil, as you mentioned in this case, is possible because majority of the people are asleep. So in this case, in Syria, I've been targeted a lot. So I say the truth. I tell you the truth. And the truth is very bitter. And it doesn't really match your religious beliefs or what you watched on your TV outlets. It's uncomfortable. I'm trying to make you uncomfortable in this case. But some people, when they get uncomfortable, they get violent. So they're literally doing the bidding of the empire by trying to use physical violence against you. So I've been attacked. I've been even attacked by a knife in the street by people thinking that I'm harming them, whereas I am trying to help them.
Yes.
But there was psyop by the establishment into thinking that I'm the evil guy. But I'm here standing and I'm telling them, you are wrong. And I will continue saying you're wrong. I'm not going to come and be diplomatic with you. And in this case, I'm reminded of a quote by a poet very famous in the Arab world. His name is Nizar Qabbani. And I'm trying to describe this type of people, right? He says, I translated this quote. He's talking about these ignorant people, right? He says, they want to open the world while they are unable to open a book. They want to cross the sea while they are sleeping on a drop of water. They preach a cultural revolution while their culture doesn't extend beyond the door of the cafe where they sit. And this is the truth. Most people read some articles or some titles, but they can't understand why it is happening. So they are giving you snaps of news. You're consuming the news, but you don't know why this news happened, and why these TV channels or these outlets have chosen to tell you about this event. There is nothing that you watched on TV or on social media nowadays, because it turned into another mainstream media, basically. Everything is on purpose. No journalist working for a corporation or for some rich people like Elon Musk. He has many people on X. They're pushing certain narratives on X, for example. None of them post anything where it not there should be something behind it, and they are feeding you this in order to so that you are afraid, or you have an anxiety, or and desperation, and all these things push people into doing things that they don't want to do. Like during COVID, what pushed people into accepting the measures or the injections and just following all the orders, like going into a restaurant, you have to wear a mask, but then you sit, you remove the mask. So what made people follow these absurd rules? It's fear, either fear of the virus or fear of the law. Yeah. So fear make people do things that they probably don't want to do. And this is the same thing in Syria. Like, they made the people so impoverished and demoralized and fearful that the future is so bleak that they accepted the alternative, and the alternative in this case is Galani. And now people come and tell me, like, stop talking about Syria, those are Syrians from Syria. We want to try the new alternative.
Yeah, okay. You know what? 100%. I don't know, you can't see this, but if I lift my laptop, can you see there's a sticker?
Yes.
And fear is the mind killer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. I want to quickly show you something as well. So on my X feed yesterday, I posted this. I'm in the opinion that everything we see on the so-called news, whether it be wars, bizarre weathers, fires, assassination, terrorism, whatever it is all part of a well-crafted story to keep the masses distracted, divided, dumbed down, indoctrinated, and to manipulate the way they think. And, I was really touched by when you said that, when you tell people things, they get uncomfortable and they actually get upset with you. So, for example, this morning I got one of my subscribers, supporters, email me, and it's a very heartfelt email. I spent a long time writing it, but one of the things he was saying, why are you always bashing Trump? Why do you have all these guests on that are critical of Trump? And it's like, because he's not our friend. Because this is how the enemy works. It's the Hegelian dialect. They push you towards one, the thesis, then they create the antithesis of that. So they give you this natural reaction to this horrible woke, Kamala Biden nonsense. So there is a lot of good in that, because yes, the other stuff is garbage, and these people will say all the things you want to hear. But the end outcome will be a fusion of the thesis and the antithesis, and you get the synthesis. And the reality is the evil people will come out on top. They are constantly manipulating our emotions and the way we think. And believing in Trump is allowing them to control your thought processes. And I need to find some way of articulating this properly, because a lot of people do think, oh, why are you having a go at Trump? We need to give him a chance, as if he's our friend and, he's one of the good guys. But this is where you come back to, like, your people in Syria are saying, oh, we need to give these guys a chance. These head choppers, these people, let's talk about Syria for starters. Now, we talked about the reasons why they wanted to destroy Syria, and it's been long in the making. Now, you are Syrian, am I correct? You were born in Syria.
Yes.
And you're a Christian Orthodox?
Yes, I was born in a Christian Armenian Orthodox family.
Okay. So, your family then will be very aware of the history of the Turks and the real genocide, the Armenian genocide that took place. So, how dangerous the Turks can be, and radicalized Islam and whatever else, and now effectively Syria is now carved up between Turkey, Saudi, Qatar, and Israel. It's not a sovereign country anymore. It's totally controlled by these three countries. That must be quite scary. But can I go back to when you were a child? When you were growing up as a child, what was Syria like? Was it safe? Was it dangerous? Was there a lot of corruption? Did you have freedoms? What did you have to wear hijab and, a long beard and, obey, what the masters were telling you? Or what was it like, dude? What was it like?
Syria has been was a country where you can you can follow any lifestyle you want. So you can go from the far left to the far right, but I'm not talking about the Western standards, right? Like I just want to give an example for the people to understand. Like if you're a man and a woman, and you are a girlfriend and a boyfriend, you're not married, for example, and you go to a restaurant holding hands, or going to a bar and drinking an alcohol, or she's wearing a miniskirt, nobody even dares to give a look, because in our societies where we have this social control, like a woman is protected by the society, not one by a particular man. Of course, there are assholes everywhere. So if an asshole comes and tries to harass a woman, you will see men in the street they don't know who is the woman, basically, and they're defending her, right? And at the same time, you can be in the middle in your lifestyle. You can be more on the right, like you become more conservative. You can wear a hijab. You can wear a niqab. You can do whatever you want. As long as you're not imposing your lifestyle on others, then everything will be all right. What was not allowed in Syria, in the political sense, were the political Islam, the religious type of opposition, right, against the government. And this has started in the 70s, and the government crushed them once, and this was the second attempt, and they were successful. So we always knew that Syria is between, like, some people say it's between two rocks. Like, you have political a system that doesn't tolerate political opposition to it, but it gives the cultural freedoms, it gives the social freedoms in the country, and it gives you stability, economy, healthcare, etc. So you're gaining, let's say, everything but the political freedoms. And on the other hand, they are promising you political freedoms, basically. And this is coming from the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda types, which I don't believe they will bring this type of freedoms to the people. And in the discourse of coming to power through armed insurgency, we're going to lose every other positive aspect, right? So I'm not naive and to come and say, oh, let's try the alternative. Let's see if Galani and Baghdadi are good guys. No, I'm not naive. So I prefer to have stability, healthcare, education, security, safety in the streets over a promised political freedoms by people who don't believe in political freedoms, right? So this was the situation in the country in the past. Myself, I grew up in Aleppo, and I studied in Syrian schools, went to university in Syria. It was people were bragging about the safety that you can carry like $20,000 or $40,000 in a bag in your hand, and you can walk in the street and nobody dares to come and take the money from you or steal the money from you, right? This is how much safe it was in Syria.
And what about being a minority, a Christian? Were you treated second-class citizen? Were you scared or treated badly in any way? Was there racism towards you?
Actually, the successive governments, let's say, in Syria were very keen on protecting the minorities, because Syria is a mosaic of different sects and ethnicities and religions. And the beauty of Syria is that they can coexist together. It's a multiculturalism in the correct sense, not engineered multiculturalism, because throughout history, many civilizations and empires passed through and they all left their traces in Syria. So the government wants to keep this Syria as a melting pot of these different cultures, religions, ethnicities, etc. But when you have a group which claims to be an Islamic and they want to come to power, when you say like it's an Islamic, then this one Islamic Sunni group will dominate over the others because they own the truth. And this is the dangerous thing that many people do not really get. They think this is anti-Islamic talking point. It's not. Like, if you're a Muslim, you can pray and go and fast and do whatever you want in Syria. But bringing religion into politics, that's when the danger arises. Just like if I'm a Christian Orthodox and I say, I will establish a political party based only on Christian Orthodoxism, right? Then I own the truth. And if I come to power, my Muslim colleagues and friends are not going to have the same rights because they don't own the truth.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is the problem with, and this is sponsored by powerful powers. So who owns the money in the region the most? Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia, since 2018, they have been against political Islam because they no longer want to export Wahhabism around the world for the sake of developing their country and becoming, they have an economic vision. They want to host the World Cup. They have different things they're doing. We agree or disagree with them, that's a different thing. But they're not exporting this ideology any longer around the world. Before that, since Afghanistan,
the damage is done. I mean,
yes,
people
but
don't
now
understand.
Qatar replaced. Qatar replaced now.
Exactly, but people don't understand, like, I'm not a Muslim anymore, by the way. I just believe in God. I keep it simple. I told you this before. But, you know, and growing up as a kid, I went to several Muslim countries. I met thousands of Muslims, and I never met any radical Muslim. I met people just like you do here in the UK, just normal people who just want to get on with life, have a good job, have a nice family, love their kids, go on holidays. And that's what all the Muslims in all the Muslim countries were like as well. I never met anyone who wanted to go and create caliphate or take over the world. None of these long-haired, long-bearded Muslims, you know, wearing the same kind of clothes. I never met anybody like that. It was never. But the Saudis have this Wahhabism, which is a very, very radical form of Islam, and they went and exported it to all these other countries, poor countries. They funded their schools and madrasas and indoctrinated and brainwashed thousands, if not millions of people. And the funny thing is, they did it under the watchful eye of their American and British allies. And I think they were encouraged to do so because it's better to control a fanatical country, and it's easier to bomb a fanatical country. It's easier to label a bunch of people as crazies than say, oh, actually, we're bombing this democratic, secular, reasonable, civilized society. People would say, well, why are you doing that? It's much easier to say, oh, we're bombing those barbaric, rapist Muslims, those nut jobs. It's just easier to denigrate a whole group of people and then call them the baddies. And then you can do regime change wherever you like and bring in democracy. I mean, you talked about democracy. Dude, we don't have democracy here in the West. We've got a
I know.
uni-party system. It's a
Yeah.
uni-party system that's controlled by the globalist elites and the corporations. And the funny thing is, it's complete hypocrisy. This idea that, we're going to introduce democracy to other countries in the world. And it's like, how about we have regime change here first? Anyway, let's go back to what you're saying. So you're in Syria, you're being treated perfectly well, you're an equal citizen. And but so then why were there riots? Why was there some discontent? Why were people not happy? There was something that happened. What was that?
Actually, I truly believe that many of the resentment of the people against the government were manufactured. So you create stories about you push lots of atrocity propaganda. For example, in the 80s, the West supported the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria. Why? Because in 1979 and 1978, Egypt struck a deal with Israel, the Camp David Accords, and Syria rejected to be part of this peace treaty with Israel. And the West started supporting this Muslim Brotherhood group in Syria and encouraged them to wage an insurgency against the government to exert pressure on Hafez al-Assad to accept a peace treaty with Israel. So between 79 and 82, there has been an armed insurgency. Muslim Brotherhood declared an Islamic Emirate in Aleppo and Hama. They went on a purge against the minorities. They have killed, there is a famous massacre in Aleppo called the Cadets Massacre or the Aleppo Cadets Massacre. So they invaded the military school and they have killed every Alawite in this school. And this was the first sectarian organized killing in Syria, and the government reacted against them. And those are all proven. The government didn't act against them until this sectarian killing started in the country, and they crushed them in Hama. Now, if you listen to Al Jazeera, which is the most watched TV outlet in the region, they would tell you Assad the father killed 60,000 civilians in Hama. If you watch American news outlets, they would say Assad went and started killing the civilians en masse, and there were tens of thousands of casualties in Hama. But then you have a classified CIA document, which was leaked later to the press, and the Americans, they had their assets in Hama, and they say the number of casualties were 5,000. And 1/3 of them were Syrian soldiers, and 1/3 of them were the Muslim Brotherhood militants, and 1/3 were the civilians. So we're talking about around 1,500 civilians and 1,500 of militants and 1,500 Syrian soldiers. There is no 40,000, 50,000, 60,000. But this incident was used to trigger an uprising in 2011. They said the father came and killed the Sunnis in Hama and crushed us, and he imposed his sectarian rule, minority rule, over the majority. So the majority has to wake up against the minority and take the power back. We need to go back to the glories of the past. We need to go back to the Umayyad era. We are the majority.
Suleiman and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. So this type of things, populistic talk, bring religion into the issue, and past events, like you have to take a revenge against the government, right? So all these factors created this anger on the government during the time when they were trying to remove Gaddafi in Libya. So the sequences of events, when you see it, it's not normal. It's not illogical that once Gaddafi is overthrown, all of a sudden things start in Syria. During this time, you see the shipment of weapons from Libya to Syria, right?
100%. Let me just come back to the Libya thing. So Libya, we were told it was a natural civil war, and we were actually told that Gaddafi was bombing his own innocent civilians, when in actual reality, Qatar British army officials, Americans, were arming militants from abroad, releasing the fanatical Muslims from a prison.
Yes.
And when they were attacking the Libyan army, that's when Gaddafi sent more reinforcements. So basically, Gaddafi was fighting Muslim fundamentalists who were actually supported by the West and Qatar. And you can't make this shit up. And it's like, for example, again, when people say to me, why would the West, brings Trump, who's waking people up and showing all this anti-woke stuff, and he's a good guy, and he's saying all the right things. And I go, why? The West does this all the time. It plays both sides. They were best friends with Gaddafi. They were having peace in the desert on one day, and the next day they're funding the Muslim fundamentalists. They say that they're against Muslim fundamentalists and Muslim terrorists. They have them on their CIA and US, state recognized terrorist groups. But at the same time, they're also funding, arming, and training these terrorists. Don't you see? This is how the game is played. They lie to us constantly. They're hypocrites. So what happened after the Libya fiasco is what you said is 100% right. When you say shipments, you can see Turkish ships, roll on, roll off ferries, literally taking the arms and the soldiers from Libya back to Turkey and into Syria. So
and why? The question is why? Why?
Why? Yeah.
Why Turkey would do that, right? Turkey had multiple reasons to do it. One, Syria was a industrial competitor, basically. So Syria was independent economic country competing with the larger Turkey in the region. Syria had the best wheat. Syria had the best cotton. So they were producing good clothing, for example, even to the European markets, right? So this was one of the reasons. The second reason is Erdogan, after Libya, after Egypt, after Tunisia, they brought the Muslim Brotherhood to power to these countries. And the Muslim Brotherhood are affiliates to the party of Erdogan. So Erdogan saw that these parties in Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya coming to power, it's an opportunity for him to extend his influence in the region, just like the era of Ottomanism. So he had his vision of neo-Ottomanism in the region, but he doesn't have to occupy all these countries directly. He can occupy them indirectly through these political powers which share the same vision and ideology with Erdogan, right? So he wanted to have his upper hand over Syria, again, to the Muslim Brotherhood. The last time Erdogan's representative, Davut Oglu back then, and Assad met was in June 2011. And Erdogan told basically Assad that if he gives 1/3 of his cabinet and the government to the Muslim Brotherhood, then everything will be all right. They will not ship weapons. They will not send fighters. They will stop all this insurgency in Syria. And Assad rejected it. So the result was that they started shipping these weapons and people into Syria. And the third reason is gas, energy. Turkey has big aspirations in Europe, and the Qatari gas can come through Syria to Turkey, and Turkey could be the hub or the distributor of the Qatari gas to Europe. So they want to play this role, and Syria didn't want to stab their ally in Russia, basically, to allow Turkey to have this access in the markets, and they said no. So there were multiple reasons why they did it. Democracy was none of it, right? So those were the reasons. But let's go back a little bit about these fundamentalist groups. I will give some examples, and I will leave this as a food for thought for your audience. So late 70s, early 80s, the CIA come with the Turkish intelligence, and they say we have to support these radicals in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union. And they were successful. Hillary Clinton says later that this was a brilliant idea to take down the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, and we bankrupt them basically in Afghanistan. But she says later, but everything has a blowback, and she thinks that the blowback was 9/11. I don't even believe that was a blowback. I think that this monster that they created in Afghanistan was an asset for them to create a political or a militaristic group which can attack the United States through intelligence coordination with the Saudis. Now, let's remember that the Saudis played the most instrumental role in Afghanistan. They were embedded with this mujahideen against the Soviet Union. Now, in 2001, when the attack happened on 9/11, who was the Saudi ambassador in the United States? Was Bandar bin Sultan.
Yes.
And Bandar bin Sultan had a very close ties to the Bush family, and he was even called Bandar Bush for having family ties with the Bush. And this attack happened when these two families were in charge. Bush was in as president, and Bandar bin Sultan was the ambassador for 20 years in Washington. And during this time, we have documented evidence that the Saudi intelligence hired at least 5 to 6 of the hijackers who were in Washington, and they arrived in the United States, and one of the Saudi spies went and hired them, and they rented them a home and presented them the training and everything to carry out this type of attacks against the American Twin Towers. Now, Bandar bin Sultan, he technically resigned in 2005. And he disappeared from the scene. He came back to the scene again in 2013 as the head of the Saudi intelligence. And at what year ISIS was established in Syria? 2013. The same year Bandar bin Sultan came as the head of the Saudi intelligence, ISIS, we learned about ISIS. I would argue that al-Nusra was more Qatari and Turkish construct, and ISIS was a Saudi. And during this time, the Saudis and the Turks and the Qataris, first they had similar interests, which is removing Assad from power, and then they had a clash of interests because who will dominate Syria? Are they going to be the Muslim Brotherhood types or the allies of Saudi Arabia? So each one of them started supporting opposite sides. And that's why there was a split in Al-Qaeda, and we've seen the creation of ISIS, which was supported by Saudi Arabia, and Al-Nusra Front, which was supported by Qatar and the Turks, and they had clashes. These clashes between ISIS and Al-Qaeda were not for ideological reasons or for like they had a different vision for Syria. No, it was for political reasons, because the financiers were different, and the outcomes that they wanted, who's going to serve the others.
And aren't there actually roots of British and American intelligence in all of these groups, like the Muslim Brotherhood? They're seriously backed by the Western imperialists. You know, it's not like they're just organic as well. There's always a hidden hand. Am I not right?
Actually, the Muslim Brotherhood was created in 1928 and by someone called Hassan al-Banna in Egypt. And he was basically supported by the British intelligence back then in Egypt. And the reason for it is very simple. Back then, the Brits, they were the occupiers of Egypt, so they called it a mandate. And the Arab intellectual class in the universities and also in the streets, back then, the intellectual class was not like now. Like, they were real intellectual class. They were not corrupted. And they ran against the occupation. And they started protesting, and there was even a resistance against the British occupation. But who was carrying out this opposition or this resistance against the Brits? They were the nationalists and the socialists. So the left wing and the nationalists. And they came together against the occupation. Now, the Brits, just like as I explained in the case of Iraq in 2003, there is resistance against the occupation. You have to divide them. And how would you divide them? You support the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Muslim Brotherhood organically, they would fight against the nationalists and the socialists.
Exactly.
Because for them, the Muslim Brotherhood, they want to establish an Islamic state, and the concept of the state is different from what the nationalists want, a nation state, and what the socialists want as a socialist state. So they start fighting against each other, now in Egypt, and this has accelerated under Jamal Abdel Nasser in the 50s. Who was his opponent? Who was fighting against him? They were the Muslim Brotherhood. And who was the number one enemy of Jamal Abdel Nasser back then? Were the Israelis, the Brits, and the French.
Suez Canal, all that kind of stuff. So people need to know he was a Arab nationalist.
Yeah.
And what the West did not want is an Arab nationalist. What does a nationalist want? It wants what's best for their country and their peoples. And a nationalist doesn't differentiate between Muslims and Coptic Christians or whatever. It meant all Egyptians. So, and Nasser wanted all of Egypt and all its people to be independent, sovereign, and look after. And what did the West want? They didn't want that. They didn't want the Suez Canal nationalized. They didn't want a strong Arab leader. They wanted a vassal kind of state. They wanted a dictator that they could control. They wanted someone who was unreasonable, who would come across erratic, fundamentalist. And what else? You promote the Muslim fanatics then. You promote the Muslim fundamentalists. Because then you've got this person who's doing your bidding, but you can also call them out and say, look how stupid they are and look how rubbish they are. And, you know, we can't deal with these people. They're below us. Whereas if you've got a secular Arab patriot, well, that's a different kettle of fish. How do you control that person? How do you make them look bad because they're doing what's right for their country? And, you know, this is the problem that we've got now. Like I've talked about this on my Substack, that the war is on God, country, and the family. Like,
yes.
They do not want God, wherever it is. They do not want strong national countries and patriots running the country, and they do not want a strong family unit. And the funny thing is, sometimes they'll sound like they're promoting a country or the family, but they're not. They're not. This is the deception, and this is the inversion. So anyway, we know about the Arab thing and the Muslim Brotherhood. And the funny thing is the West needs to understand this, that our imperial leaders have always promoted and backed the extremist Muslims. Now just think about that. What the hell is that all about? And dude, 9/11, I'm sorry, I think is a false flag. I think like all of these things, I think most terrorism that we see in the world today, including Islamic terrorism, which by the way went away during COVID, interestingly, I think most Islamic terrorism is either funded, supported, encouraged, or organized by Western security apparatus.
Or let it happen.
Basically. They let it happen. You know, it's convenient for them. And it's important that we also remember that Hamas, the current bogeyman of the day, was also created by Israel. And they proudly boast about it because they wanted to divide the secular, multi-ethnic, multi-religious Palestinian opposition, which was, you know, very reasonable. You know, you've got Christians, you've got Muslims, you've got you know, women and men and non-religious people fighting an Israeli racist apartheid state and occupation. They're fighting for their freedom and liberation like any peoples would. What do? Why don't we destroy that? Why don't we fracture that opposition and create a fanatical Muslim group that we can then label as a bunch of, you know, crazies? And then, you know, we can't negotiate with them and we can do whatever we like to them. It's the same playbook again and again, isn't it?
Actually, as you mentioned, this Islamism, nationalism, this is very important also for your Western audience to understand correctly. Nationalism in our region was not based on ethnicity. It's not like it's only the Arabs, right? Like if you're an Arab, then you're part of the Nasser movement or you're part of the Ba'ath movement. Actually, the founders basically of the Pan-Arabism or Ba'athism in Syria, they were Christians at the beginning. And this has been something that is important for the people to see. Like, what were the options of the Arabs in the region? You either are part of Pan-Arabism, which combines different religions and ethnicities into an ideology, a unifying ideology, and then this country, if it's unified, then they pursue unification with Egypt, and this has happened between Syria and Egypt. They tried to create a unity for 3 years and it failed, but there were attempts. So once you bring Pan-Arabism into the region, which is a unifying factor, and you have another Pan-Arabism in Egypt, they will try to unite. Or between Syria and Iraq, or between Syria and Palestine, right? But if you have a Pan-Arabism in Syria and Islamism in other place, or if it's Islamism here and Pan-Arabism there, you will have different conflicting ideas and ideologies, and they can't come together. And this is the main issue, which I firmly believe that is why the Brits have planted Israel in Palestine. It's not only about what they believe in, that the Jews have to have their safe place or a state for themselves. No. If you see the history of the region and put the map, you will see that every empire came into the Middle East or West Asia. They tried to advance between Aleppo to Latakia, Tartus, Beirut, to Tyre, Sidon, Haifa, Tel Aviv, and then they go to Northern Africa. So this coastal line is very important for them. But this connectivity between Middle East and North Africa, if you have economic integration between Syria, Palestine, and Egypt, or a unity between Syria, Palestine, and Egypt, you will have an empire-like power in the region which possesses huge amount of natural resources and also linking the economies into each other.
Yeah, the Asian landmass to the
exactly.
African landmass. Don't you think it's incredible that there's no road or major rail network that goes from Africa to Asia, that there's no major rail networks between Asian countries? Or road networks. Everything has to be shipped or flown. Who controls the seas? It's the British Empire and the American Empire. It's all about division of that landmass. They cannot have Asia and Africa, trading successfully with each other. I mean, it's all geopolitics. It's all geopolitics. It's all about money. It's all about power and control. And what they use is people and brainwashing them with religion and indoctrinating them with ideas, to then keep them divided and fighting amongst each other. And it's interesting how you talk about Israel being, a tool, like an aircraft carrier, land-based aircraft carrier, where they can create division and turmoil and chaos. And in many respects, I say that, they use the Jews to further their own goals, because they're expendable. They're happy to traumatize the Israelis. I mean, I think most Israelis are traumatized. They're worried about being bombed and killed. They're told from the moment they go to school that all the countries hate them, that everyone hates them around the world and wants to destroy them. How is that good for your psyche? Like, how can that be normal for you and healthy for you? So, if you are a prison guard day and night, I think your life is just as miserable, but in a different way to the prisoner.
Yes.
Just because you're not the one, you're the one with a stick in your hand, you're being dehumanized nonetheless.
Yes.
That is not good for you. But listen, let's go back to Syria. So you've got all these multi-ethnic countries living together happily. Religions and communities living. The reality is this idea that this was a natural revolution from the people who are disgruntled. I don't really buy into that. If you correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the people who were fighting, like we said, were imported from Northern Africa. They themselves had come from Afghanistan, from Chechnya, from Qatar, from Pakistan. These are poor people who have been brainwashed by the madrasas, by the Wahhabis and the Saudis and the Qataris. Now they're being told you're going to have all this money, you're going to go to heaven and have all these virgins. And, you also had Turks. The Turks were bringing in Turkic people from Tajikistan and Turkmenistan and whatever. And so you've basically got a whole hodgepodge of foreigners, complete foreigners who don't even speak Arabic, now fighting in the so-called Syrian National Army or whatever it was. Am I right? Can you explain this to the audience?
And the funny thing is, if you mention madrasas now to people, they say, what is madrasas? Like, how can I have a conversation with you if you don't know about these madrasas, about the schools which indoctrinated generation after generation after generation, so that it is possible to speak about ISIS and Nusra and Qaeda nowadays. So education is key. If you are not educated, if you're not reading, if you're not learning from history, then history will repeat itself. History doesn't repeat itself. It's us, we don't learn. The difference is, I'm very serious on this. Look, why I remember these things. I come from an Armenian family, and because we have been through genocide, we passed this information from generation to after generation. I'm going to pass this to my grandchildren and to my children and grandchildren. But I see that in our region there is something like the people have the memory of the fish, and like the Ottoman Empire left only after World War I, and there was like 100 years between them, so it's like 3-4 generations, right? Is it enough time for the people to forget what was the Ottoman Empire about? And now we are receiving them as liberators of our country and raising the Turkish flag over the Aleppo citadel. Is this a liberation or it's an occupation? And when I mention this information to my friends in Syria, they think I'm paranoid. Seriously speaking, they think I'm paranoid. I'm just spreading fear so they don't accept the new reality. And that's not the case. Now, let's go back to these multinational so-called takfiris, jihadists in Syria. Like if there was an organic insurgency against the Syrian government and the Syrians chose to fight against the government, why would you need tens of thousands of multinational terrorists from all around the world? The first foreign battalion, they call it a battalion, it's just a gang at the end of the day, was established in November 2011, which was embedded with the Free Syrian Army, which was a construct that the Americans and the British thought they have to create something with the freedom. So those are the freedom fighters, right? But those multinational takfiris were fighting with the Free Syrian Army way before there was anything Al-Qaeda or ISIS. So they started importing them long time ago, from the early days. But if there was a popularity in Syria and this Free Syrian Army or whatever jihadists they were fighting against the government, they had the support of the people, they don't need people from Saudi Arabia, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Chechnya, from all around the world to come to Syria. The estimates are with tens of thousands, and those are big numbers. Like if you have...
I've read anywhere up to 100,000 were imported in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, at the peak in 2015, there was 100,000 multinational takfiris. And the question is, where are they now? They are 30% of HDS now, Galani's gang, are multinational. But the rest, those who were fighting with ISIS, where are they now? Have they returned back to their countries? Have they disappeared? What happened?
Are they in Europe?
Are they in Europe? Are they in the United? Like, this is a serious question because many of them came from Europe. They were radicalized in Europe. In Sweden, there is a famous documentary on this. In Sweden, in Belgium, in Germany, there were many places where they came from to Syria. Now they occupied Syria, and this was a matter of discussion between the Syrian intelligence under Assad and the European intelligence. By the way, they do it under the table. They were talking to Assad about these multinational terrorists. What would they do with them? Because they don't want them to come back to Europe. They send them to Syria. They don't want them to come back. So what would they do about them? Assad never accepted to keep them in Syria. But now Galani came and said, these fighters, they help the Syrian people. They deserve Syrian citizenship. So now we have people from all around the world, basically, in Syria. They are getting Syrian passports. Just like anyone comes from all around the world, if he was born in a Jewish family in Israel and they receive an Israeli citizenship. What's the difference between someone comes from Tajikistan? With due all respect to the Tajiki people, of course, they also have some minority radicals. But if somebody comes from Tajikistan and fights against me in Syria, and he receives a passport, I'm an indigenous to Syria, what's the difference between this person and someone comes from the US or Poland or Russia or Ukraine to Palestine and fights against the indigenous people and receive an Israeli passport? There is no difference. This is
you know what? But Kevork, I mean, people in the West are worried about the migrant invasion. They're worried about people from all over the world, from China, Indonesia, Afghanistan, Africa, pitching up on the southern Mexican border, pitching up in across the channel, coming into the UK. And they talk about these young army-age men now coming into our country. They're going to take over the country. And rightly so, they're fearful and they're anxious and they don't understand why suddenly hundreds of young men are in their little village, right? Of a village of 2,000 people, there's now 100 migrants in a hotel, 200 migrants in a hotel, young men. And they're like, what the hell is going on here? They're naturally scared. I can understand that. But I think what people in the West need to understand is The same evil bastards who've done this in the West, they've gone so much further in Syria. They imported an invasion of fanatical, takfirists, Salafists, fundamentalists, brainwashed thugs and psychopaths, murderers and rapists into Syria. And those guys now have taken over the country, overthrown the legitimate government, and are now running the country. Just imagine something like that happen in the UK. Just imagine all these migrants came over. You got China sponsoring a whole bunch of migrants coming over to the UK, armed insurgency, armed, rebellion, terrorism, and a war, overthrew the government of the UK, and now suddenly you got all these people now running the show here in the UK. How would people feel about that?
Including chemical weapons.
Oh, no, but that was Assad. Assad was bombing the chemical weapons, wasn't he?
They have given them sarin gas. They have given them chlorine gas. And this has been documented and proven that the Al-Qaeda elements used gas against the Syrian army positions. Lots of people have talked about that, but recently Piers Robinson. Yeah, he talked about it. And there's ample evidence to show that it was our governments and our proxies who did the gas attacks. And then we, of course, as usual, blamed it on Assad. May I give an example for the people? I think, look, the technicalities of the chemical attacks are difficult even for us to understand. If you're not really expert in chemical weapons, like there's so many details. But let's speak about it logically, right? In the first chemical attack happened in Syria. It is unreported. This was in April 2013. This was the first time we heard of a chemical attack in Syria. And this was the Syrian army saying that they came under chemical attack. And their soldiers have suffocated and they don't know what happened. So the Syrian government told the UN in April 2013 to send their investigative team to Syria to see what happened. And the Syrian government insisted that this UN expert team has to come and see if a chemical attack happened and who did the chemical attack. And during this time, the Brits and the Americans vetoed this demand multiple times. They didn't want for the UN experts to come to Syria. So it took them around 6 months of discussions in the UN to send UN expert team to Syria. And at the end, the Americans and the Brits agreed only after changing the duties and the responsibilities of this UN team. So they said, okay, you can go to Syria and investigate if a chemical attack happened, but you don't have the authority to determine who carried out the attack. We will know if it happened, but not who carried out the attack. And despite that, the Syrian government accepted. Okay. So the expert team of the UN, they arrived in Damascus on the 18th of August, 2013. They arrived to the hotel at night, and the second day they go to all these government offices to get the licenses and check on the security, because they need security to go to northern Syria, basically to Aleppo, 400 kilometers away. So they finish all the paperwork and they go back to the hotel at night to sleep. So the second day they go to Aleppo. And that exact night, when the UN expert team was in Damascus and they were on the invitation of the Syrian government and received the licenses from the Syrian government and everything, on the same night, sarin gas attack happens few kilometers away from the hotel where the experts were residing. And this was the attack on the 28th of August 2013, where 1,300 people got killed by sarin gas attack. This was a serious chemical attack on the suburbs of Damascus. And the moment the attack happened, every major media outlet, every politician that you can remember back then, from Clinton, from Obama, from David Cameron, I believe, in the UK, everyone accused Assad of using chemical weapons.
They wanted to bomb. They wanted to bomb Syria.
But logically speaking, if you are Assad and you invited the experts to Damascus to check if your army came under attack, why would you attack now with the sarin gas when the UN expert team is in Damascus. So what happened basically, the mission of the UN was to go to Aleppo, and this mission has been aborted. They never went to Aleppo to see if it happened or not. Now they changed their mission and said, there is a neurochemical attack here, we want to check. So this was the case which was thoroughly and very, I would say, professionally written about by what was the name of the investigative journalist who spoke about the blast of the Nord Stream pipelines? I forgot it.
Oh, yeah, Seymour Hersh.
Seymour Hersh wrote his investigation. There were so many testimonies from the US State Department, from the Pentagon, from the CIA in it. And all the indications were going into one direction, and this sarin gas was not from the stockpile of the Syrian government. And the British intelligence were on the ground. They took samples of the sarin gas and they sent it to the laboratories in the UK, by the way. And they came to the conclusion that this was not from the stockpile of the Syrian government. And that's what they shared this information with Obama. Obama was determined to bomb Syria. And they shared with Obama and they said he has to be careful because this was not carried out by the Syrian government. But this was from a Turkish market. And the Turkish intelligence delivered this sarin gas to the Al-Nusra Front Jaish al-Islam in Douma, in Ghouta, and they carried out this as a false flag attack to invite for an intervention. And they were very close of intervening into Syria. But everything started to crumble after that. Why? Because Syria had chemical weapons as a deterrent weapon against the nuclear weapons of Israel and against the invasions and expansions of Israel. And they never used these type weapons. They were stored to deter Israeli occupation and invasion of Syria. And once this chemical attack happened in 2013, now the Americans came and said, we are going to bomb the hell out of Syria. We're going to bomb all the military installations. We're going to bomb every air defense system. We're going to bomb every aircraft, fighter jets, every airport, everything. The regime is going to be destroyed, or you will give up your chemical weapons. And now the Russians intervened and they mediated and they decided to destroy Syria's chemical stockpile in a joint operation in the Mediterranean under the supervision of the UN, OPCW, and Americans. So they destroyed Syria's deterrent weapon. And what happens after that? It's escalation after escalation after escalation until Assad lost every deterrent weapon in his hands, and this led into the regime change war. So this was, in my opinion, Syria didn't have a choice. It was a small country. It's either going to be bombed by the US and completely destroyed, or it will use chemical weapons. That's inhumane. Like if Assad used chemical weapons against his own people, right, as they claim, he could have also threatened using the chemical weapons against Israel, telling the US, if you bomb us, we will gas Israel. He was capable of doing it, but he didn't do it. He chose the diplomatic path. And in my opinion, diplomacy with the West is very dangerous because they can shake your hands and then they kill you. And this is something that happened.
That you've nailed it. You cannot. I mean, what Libya and Syria has demonstrated is you cannot make peace with America and Britain. Sadly, the British leaders and the American leaders, because they're liars. They promise peace. They promise normalization of relationships, but it's always a lie. What they want is for you to disarm, so they can stab you, and it's as simple as that. And it's desperately sad. Listen, I want to talk about what's happening now to the minorities, but before we do that, I think we should talk about the Armenian genocide. You know, you said you're going to talk about it to your children and your grandchildren. We need to spend a little bit of time talking about that, because we talk about lots of other genocides in the world and we talk about the Holocaust. We don't talk about certain things, though. We don't talk about the Holodomor in Russia. We don't talk about the people that died in China. And we don't talk about the Armenian genocide. For those people listening who aren't up to scratch with the Armenian genocide, they probably heard about it. My friend, can you just spend a few minutes talking about what happened and why?
So, the Armenians they are a 5,000-year-old civilization in the region.
Yeah.
And in the Caucasus, basically, and in Eastern Anatolia, there was a big presence of Armenians. And there was an Armenian empire stretching between Baku, the current-day Baku, to Syria, basically. They reached to Aleppo, they reached to the coastal side of Aleppo, and some of the maps also document that the Armenians also reached to Haifa. In current Palestine. So the Armenians are not like visitors or just arrived in the region after the genocide. No, they have been in the region for quite long time. Now, as you see in this yellow area, in this area there has been 2 million Armenians living there. And when the Ottoman Empire was established, the Armenians came under the rule of the Turks. And Armenians were Christian Orthodox, and the Ottomans were Muslims. And they weren't. So Armenians considered themselves under Turkish occupation for a long time. Now, under this rule, when the Ottoman Empire started getting weaker and weaker and weaker, and let's say the last days of the Ottoman Empire rule, the Russians promised the Armenians back then, because Turkey or the Ottoman and the Soviet Union, they were going to go to war against each other, that they will have their own independent state. The Armenians, right? And during this time, the Turks, they learned about this. So they said to the Armenians, we want to save you from World War I, basically, and we want to take you somewhere else. From Eastern Anatolia, all these places, into Syria. So they walked them all the way, 1.5 million people from these areas to the Syrian deserts, and around 1.5 million Armenians perished. Now, of 2 million Armenians, 1.5 million is like 2/3 of the population, right? It's a big number of the people perished basically during this period, and this was traceable, like, because the numbers are important. Like genocide is something that you have to have the intention to commit a genocide, and also if a power commits even a killing, even one person, if you kill one person with the intention of eliminating an entire nation based on ethnic and religious background, it's a genocide. But the numbers in this case were horrendous, because this was something that we're speaking of 2 million Armenians and only 500,000 remains. So after World War I, the Armenian population has decreased big time. And some of these people arrived to Syria, to Hasake, Deir Zor, in the deserts of Syria, and they were saved by the Syrian people back then. And some of them, my parents, they used to live in Antab and Kilis in the southern current Turkey, and they managed to escape to Aleppo, and they were also saved by the Syrian people there. So I was born and raised in Syria. I received the Syrian citizenship. But nowadays,
were they saved by Syrian Christians, Syrian Muslims, or just Syrians, just everybody?
Syrians, yeah. Muslims, Christians, Kurds, they all participated in. I mean, the Syrians were also under the occupation of the Ottoman Empire, basically. This was not part, like Syria is not Turkey.
Yeah.
Syria has its own civilization, right? Its own unique civilization and identity. And this is something that nowadays we see many people who supported this so-called revolution against Assad. They come from a position that they see Turkey as their natural empire ally. That, oh, they're Muslims, we're Muslims. They're Sunni, we're Sunni. But that's... The Turks, they occupied your grandparents for 400 years. So now that you accept them as a neo-Ottoman power in Syria, you betrayed your own grandparents. Because my grandparents, the Armenians, when they arrived in Syria, they were saved by your grandparents because they knew that Turkey is an occupation force. But today you betrayed your grandparents and you accepted them as so-called liberators in Syria, which is an occupation, because you forgot this lesson of the history. And this is something, a minor detail that I want to mention, but it shows you the mentality. Vast majority of the people who support Galani and HTS nowadays, whether they are militants or just some ordinary activists on social media, the vast majority of them, they say to me, Why are you speaking about Syria? You're not Syrian, you're Armenian. Go back to Armenia.
Oh, God.
Right? But this mentality shows you that they see me as someone who was saved by his grandparents, by the Ottoman Empire, as an alien in the Syrian society, whereas the Turks, who occupied his grandparents, subjugated them for 400 years, they've forgotten about this, and now they're receiving them again as liberators. This also proves the point that we started at the beginning of this conversation, that history doesn't repeat itself. It's the people who forget about these historical lessons.
Can I show you something quickly?
Yeah.
So I wrote this Substack, right? And you've just confirmed, what I'm talking about. So this is my Substack. I said the war, this is a part of a talk I gave. The war on our minds is the most dangerous of all. Through indoctrination, intense propaganda, behavioral manipulation, and most importantly, fear, our capacity to think critically and appraise what is happening around us is disabled. We are programmed to accept the poisons as cures, to accept our slavery as a gift, to welcome our tormentors as heroes, to love our slave masters, and to become not only passive and compliant, but foot soldiers for the enemy. The enemy has captured the minds and hearts of our families, friends, and co-workers.
That's so true.
Isn't that what you're talking about?
Yes,
So,
exactly.
you've got this horrendous Armenian genocide, and then, now I think that they want to repeat it. So recently, Turkey helped Azerbaijan defeat the Armenians in the Nagorno-Karabakh. That's it. They gave them drones, they gave them military help, and it was a complete decimation of the Armenian forces because they're using this, the drone technology. And it hasn't stopped. Now Turkey's talking about they want a land corridor between Azerbaijan and Turkey, and they are openly talking about Armenia being a fascist state.
Yes.
And we need to defeat fascism. And it sounds like they're now preparing for another war to wage against Armenia. It's very worrying. I don't know about you, but they will. And I think people need to understand that Israel is a very close friend of Azerbaijan, which is a Muslim country. So it gets so messed up. And so Israel is giving lots of arms to Azerbaijan, which is a Muslim country, and Turkey is a Muslim country, and these two countries are allies of Israel. Like, for example, Erdogan talks about Israel, but it's all hot air because still shipments of gas and oil and weapons are going to Israel. So, Erdogan is a Zionist and is, a close friend of theirs, but Israel and Azerbaijan and Turkey are going to be conspiring to attack the Christian country of Armenia. Am I correct?
Yes, I actually, in 2020, when Azerbaijan attacked Nagorno-Karabakh, 60% of the weapons they used against the Armenians were from Israel. Israel and Azerbaijan, they are very close allies, and for multiple reasons. It's weapons against gas. So 40% of Israel's gas energy needs come from Azerbaijan to Turkey, Ceyhan port. So 40% of Israel's war machine against the Palestinians and the Lebanese and the people in the region is being fueled by Azerbaijan and Turkey, right? So this is something that many people do not see and they don't understand, because they see Erdogan is just like barking loud against Israel, and they think like he's some sort of anti-Israel figure. But this is just populism, and he gains popularity among the brainless people in the region, thinking that Erdogan is their savior. And this is the Zionist project. They wanted for Syria to fall in the hands of Israel, of Turkey, of Erdogan, because Erdogan is their ally. He's a NATO member. And what happened is, see the timing, like Palestinians fighting in Gaza, the Lebanese fighting in Lebanon, and Israel wants to break the axis of resistance in the region against Israel, and Israel wants to break this axis of resistance, and they can't intervene directly against Syria because now everybody will show sympathy with Assad against Israel. So what they do is basically they unleash this HTS terror army again from Idlib, and they occupy Syria. and they break the axis of resistance. Now, Hezbollah doesn't have supply chain from Iran, doesn't have supply chain from Syria, doesn't have an access into Syria or into Iraq or into Iran any longer. So they are now localized party. And if Hezbollah is localized and doesn't have supply chains, Hezbollah cannot deliver any military aid to the Palestinians in Palestine as well. So what Turkey has done, it's a great service to Israel, and the Muslims are celebrating. And like lots of Muslims are celebrating that they finally gotten their freedom in Syria. And what
yeah, you use the word brainless. Some of my supporters are like, oh, stop using these words. I mean, what else can you say?
What else? I mean, that's exactly why I deactivated my Facebook. I had a massive following. Like if on Facebook I say hello, I used to get like 1,000 likes, and on Facebook, it's the algorithm is so difficult to get lots of likes or interaction, unlike on X. But I had a massive following on Facebook. Many millions of Syrians know me because of this. But then I chose to deactivate it and close it because for me is like, you guys, like, I'm not your savior. I'm no one, but I was just trying to show you where is reason, what is logic, and why are they doing. But then when I see people are celebrating, like you're celebrating the death of your own country, okay, I turn off my everything, I deactivate my accounts. So in Arabic there is a saying, now people are like drunk people. When you're drunk, you're celebrating, you're happy. But then the second day when you wake up is the time of the hangover and the time for serious thinking. So leave them now celebrate because they're like drunk, because they have been hypnotized by the press to think that this is good. Okay, celebrate now. But when the reality hits the fan and shit hits the fan, then you will wake up and you will say, and this is what happened basically. Like, I have a friend who's a very good friend who also lives in Germany, and I saw him celebrating the removal of Assad. I said, look, Habibi, I said, you can celebrate the removal of Assad, but you cannot celebrate the takeover of Syria by HTS. It's not binary. You have to be careful. And there was this clash. He thought like I'm against his will because he wants democracy in Syria. And this was 3 weeks ago. And yesterday he called me again. And he said, oh, okay, the situation is really bad in Syria. And I said, so why are you calling me? I thought it's going to be good. Everything is going to be all right. Once he leaves the country, everything is going to turn into Switzerland. But this is what they were fed by the press for a very long time. And people do not know that Al Jazeera is the biggest psyop in the region.
Yes.
Because Al Jazeera is the biggest TV news outlet in the region, and tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people watch Al Jazeera every day. So if Al Jazeera says this is good, many people will believe it's good.
But Kevork, wouldn't you argue that's the psyop is that Al Jazeera 90% of the time tells the truth? It will expose the wrongs that are going on. But 10% of the time it'll be a blatant lie. And so the best lie to swallow is one that's covered in layers of truth.
Yes.
You don't see, if I give you a lie today, Kevork, and say, here, Kevork, please swallow this lie, you'll be like, get lost. But if I give it to you and go, oh, look how delicious it is. Come on. It smells nice. It looks great. It tastes nice. And then you swallow it and the poison is right in the middle. You didn't even know. Right. I got you. And that's the way Al Jazeera works. Now, we can say people are brainless, and I get that frustration. I get angry, I'm frustrated. I go, people are goddamn stupid. But part of me then goes, no, Ahmed, be patient, understand, elevate yourself, become like a guru, understand and empathize that these people are victims, that they're brainwashed. But I'm battling myself all the time because I want to shake people. I want to shake people and say, stop being so fucking dumb and wake up. How many times did the people have to do the psyop to you and you keep falling for it? Like, you keep falling for it. So, yeah, I do.
I found a way out. I found a way out of this. To be honest with you, I'm just like you, and it's so frustrating, right? Like during the COVID era, people ask me sorry, but these are stupid questions, like, why would the media lie? It's why would the media lie? It's like, you have lots of homework to do before we discuss, like, it's like, why would I talk to someone asking me, why would the media lie? It's like, this is the most crazy, cringe thing to ask. But the same thing also is in Syria, right? Like, I invested from my mental health, from my emotions into this conflict. Like, I consider it my country, my nation, and this is something like very important and emotional for me, because also Syrians saved my grandparents from the genocide, right? Those are my roots here, so I wanted to help the people, but then I realized most people will always be on the wrong side. Always. It's not like this is not something unique in 2025, 2024. This is the cycle of history for a long time. So for me, if people like their comfort zone and like the comfortable, let's say, lies that they are being fed, okay, I will not accept it, but I will not invest from my anger and frustration to harm myself.
Yeah.
So what I'm doing is basically I'm doing the same job, but I'm not going to go and like, my friend called me yesterday and he was like, the situation is, but okay, what can I do for you? Like before I was like, are you stupid? Like I start to invest, like, haven't I tried to explain this and that to you? This is going to happen.
Yeah.
No, now everybody has an individual responsibility. You educate yourself, you read, you understand, and you see why it's happening. Then maybe we can find better solutions for our countries. But if you're going to fall into the same trap, like if you're born in the Middle East, like you're lucky and unlucky. You're unlucky because of the wars being waged against you, and in different types, shapes, and forms. But you are also lucky to see the examples of other countries in the region and learn from them. Like if you're Syrian and you don't look at Iraq, then what are you doing in your life? Like if Iraq was on your neighbor, same thing happened there, and you refuse to look at it, then it's your fault.
Yes.
Like then you have Libya in North Africa. It happened in front of your eyes, and you looked at it. If you didn't learn from it, it's your fault. So there were so many open books for you to read and learn, but you refused to do that. Then I can't really come and patronize you, like say you're this and that and you're not learning, because then I'm getting also ill, like why like I also should have my priorities, which is like my family, my close circle, etc. But if I'm going to invest all my energy on anger and agony and trying to educate the people all the time, then I will lose the rest of my energy, which I can invest with my family. And now I decided that no, I don't want to do this any longer with you guys.
100%. Listen, I've got a few things I need to wrap up because I don't want. I'm conscious of the time. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I'm having fun. I'm worried about the state of the minorities in Syria. I've seen evidence that Christians and Alawites and Kurds are being rounded up. Men are being abducted in their own cars. Wives being left on the side of the street and being taken into places and being beaten and tortured. Is this incorrect, the information I'm getting? But to me, it's very worrying what's happening now with this terrorist state that's taken over in Syria.
It's documented on video. It's like they are proud of committing this type of crimes and posting them on social media platforms. So the only controversy.
So then I would argue, where is the Guardian newspaper now? Where's the BBC? Where is CNN? Why is the West not talking about this barbaric regime who are now torturing and killing Christians and Alawites and minorities in Syria? Where is the uproar? Where is the demand for regime change and no-fly zones and foreign intervention? What the fuck? Like, what is happening?
These journalists are prostitutes, basically. They have sold their soul to the establishment. They have sold their soul to the empire. They serve the empire. They're not journalists. They are they are boots on the ground.
I think a lot of them are actually intelligence people as well. They work for the intelligence.
Look, if you work for BBC, The Guardian, CNN, I mean, you don't have to have direct ties to the intelligence, but you are already working for an outlet which is serving the intelligence, right? And you have strict editorial lines you have to follow. And these people are like people like Clarissa Ward or Abu Damon of CNN, those who are in Syria, they know what they're doing. Like, why none of them goes now to Homs or to Latakia and raise awareness of what's happening there? There is ethnic cleansing happening against the Alawites in Homs and in Latakia, and Christian families in the valley of Christians in Homs, they've been massacred by these HTS Galani gangs, and this is all documented on video. Now, there is something I want to mention here.
Sorry, can you go into a little bit more detail, though, before you go into that? When you say massacre, like, people need to hear the story. What is happening to Christians and Alawites in Syria? What are they doing to them? Not my words. I want to hear it from you. So
basically, they go to towns, small villages and small towns. And those are really poor people, right? And they accuse them of being a collaborator with the ex-Assad regime because these people refuse to join the so-called revolution. So if you refuse to join, then you are a collaborator with the Assad regime. And they say you were carrying arms against us. So now we are coming for you. What they did basically is many of the former soldiers of the Syrian army or the security apparatuses, etc., HTS came and said, look, we're not going to take revenge against you. You have to give up your arms. Now we need to start over. We have to start a new chapter. And the people were so scared that they gave up their arms to HTS. And once they gave up their arms, they sent their multinational Takfiris, they sent the Islamic Turkestan army, the Uyghurs, the Tajikis, the Saudis to these towns in order to say those were the rogue elements in HTS and not Syrian HTS, right? And now that what they're doing, basically, they bring like 20 men or 30 men from these towns and accuse them of being collaborator with the Assad regime. They commit summary executions against them. Those are all documented, or they humiliate them in the worst way possible. Like, in fact, imagine you're in front of your family or wife, and they drag you to the street with other men, and they tell you have to crawl and you have to howl like a dog. And if you don't howl like a dog, you will be killed. And they're doing it every day, documented on video. There was a Christian family. There was a Christian family in in a region called the Valley of Christians in Homs. So their home was raided by HTS, and they say that this was just a robbery. It went wrong. It's gone wrong. So they killed the wife, a gunshot, and they decapitated the man in his home. So this is happening every day. Like, I see videos of this like every day on social media. And the only backlash that these HTS terrorists are receiving from their supporters, basically, people are telling them, can you please commit the crime without documenting it on video? Like, there are countless number of videos I watched by activists, basically, and journalists who support HTS. They live in Europe, they live in Germany, and they're telling HTS terrorists, can you please, like, do the ethnic cleansing without video? Like, it's too controversial to do it on documenting it on smart. So they don't oppose the ethnic cleansing and the massacres against the minorities in Syria, but they're only objecting that this is happening on smartphones, just like the Israelis are doing in the Gaza Strip, right? So this is the main. There are people. You mentioned that the Western government support this HTS. They also support these journalists. They support these activists. Like, imagine if I come today and I'm on your podcast, and now I call for the extermination of an entire population. A few hours later, the police will break my apartment and they will take me to the dungeon.
Yeah, and I'll get cancelled again. I've been cancelled so many times. Kevork, you have no idea how many times.
But these people, they speak openly from Germany, from France, from Britain about exterminating an entire population in Syria based on ethnic and religious background. and it just goes unquestioned. Nothing happens. Like, there are people who support HTS, Jolani, they live here, and nothing happens to them. Imagine if I support any prescribed terrorist organization. Like, you will be arrested very fast.
Absolutely. I mean, now if you question Israel, you get arrested.
Yeah.
What are you talking about, dude? If you just simply say something about the genocide in Palestine, you get cancelled. I got cancelled in my hospital. You lose your job. You get arrested. It's insane. So the Christians and the minorities are being tortured, are being humiliated, are being ethnically cleansed. This is a disaster, and the West is saying nothing about it. Nothing.
You know what they do, the West, basically? And when I say the West, I'm specifically speaking about the people in charge, right? So they want to empty Syria from its Christianity. And this is something that I came to the conclusion, like, I think that there are pretty anti-Christian movement and powers in the West. And they did this in Iraq. They ethnically cleansed 90% of the Christians from Iraq, 1.5 million now, 150,000. But how would they do the ethnic cleansing? They create the security conditions for the people to crave for migration and becoming refugees, basically. And then they open these NGOs, the liberal NGOs. They accept the Christians as refugees into the Western societies or in the United States, and they empty Iraq and Syria from its Christianity. And this has been happening since 2012 in Syria. If you're a Christian and you apply for these NGOs, you get your asylum very quickly.
What would you tell the Christians in the West? Because I don't think they realize this.
I don't think that we share the same.
The Western leaders, so-called Western leaders, the Christian Western leaders, they are waging a war on Christians in the Middle East. One of the oldest populations, in the world, the oldest population of Christianity in the world, they are ethnically cleansing them from the Middle East. And the Christians don't even know that, do they? Most people in the West don't know this. What would you say to them?
Very, very few people know. And those people who know, they are accused of being far right for going to Syria and helping the Christians. I think everything is upside down in the West, in terms of what is Christianity and what is moral and what is immoral, what is democracy, everything is different here. And the people are very busy with their lives, like running after the trains, going to their jobs, 9 to 5, go back home, eat something, watch TV, sleep, repeat every day. And then how would you pay your taxes? I live here. I know how things work. But this is my job, That's why I have the privilege to spend more time to read and document and speak about this case. But most people don't have the time to read. Like, they could have like an hour per day to watch their TikTok videos and go sleep. This is it. People are not awake, And why would they care? Like, why would they care what's happening in Syria?
Well, we'll come to that in a second. So, I know that, this HTS, Al-Nusra, they were recruiting young children and they were getting them to decapitate people's heads, Syrian army soldiers. Yes. And now they are still promoting these young child killers. It's such a twisted world, this twisted, there's a group of people, the Yawazi, or what was it, in northern Iraq?
Yes.
They massacred all of them and raped their women and enslaved them. These are not good people that have been brought in. And what's funny is, where are they attacking now? Israel. So Syria did nothing to Israel, but Syria immediately bombed all the naval ships, all the airfields, all the airports, like you said, if you drop your deterrence, they will come for you. They've taken over land, the biggest mountain in Syria. Has Galani said anything about this? I mean, what I heard was one of his officials in Syria saying, we don't want to wage war or have any aggression with Israel. We don't want to upset anyone. What the hell? And if I'm not mistaken, during the civil war, so-called civil war, which was not civil war, the soldiers would be going, the jihadist Salafists would be going to Israel, getting treated and operated on, patched up, fed, given weapons, and then go back into Syria.
Yes.
What the hell?
Yes.
So are they doing anything now? I mean, are they trying to reclaim their land back from Israel? What's going on?
I mean, HTS is the intelligence construct of Turkey and the United States. So they will definitely not do anything that harms the Israeli security in this case. If the weapon, the money, the ammunition, the logistics, the intelligence, everything is from NATO country, then they will not go against Israel. This is just logic. This is like one plus one, you know. And now Israel occupies largest swath of Syrian territories. They occupy Mount Hermon, the highest hill in Syria, and they overlook entire Syrian territories and Lebanon. They are 20 kilometers away from Damascus, and they destroyed all the strategic stockpile of Syria. But HTS, they say, like, they don't have the capacity now to confront Israel, and they don't want to create any tensions with anyone. They just want to have a peaceful coexistence in the region. And this is just like, it shows you what HTS is truly about, right? Like, if they had the military capability to defeat a regime which had big military power in a matter of a few days, why don't they have the military power to at least repel more advancement of the Israeli forces in Syria?
So,
because
so that comes down to, then how did they take over Syria so quickly? What the hell happened? After waging a war successfully and forcing them into the small northern province of Idlib, and with the Russians, you know, they managed to have some bit of Syria. I know there was problems in the Golan Heights. I know Idlib was a problem. I know there was a security border with Turkey at the top that the Turkish had taken. I know the Americans had occupied the east, but there was still a big rump of Syria intact. How did it suddenly fall?
There are multiple factors why it happened. I think the most important factor is there has been a deal between Turkey, Israel, the United States, and Russia. I truly believe that there has been a deal in this case because
Bashar Assad.
No, Bashar was out of the scene completely. Okay. I think there was a backdoor deal between international powers in this case, including Russia, to finish the situation in Syria, because even the allies of Syria were pressing Syria's Assad to meet with Erdogan and reconcile with Erdogan, and Assad has rejected that. Now that the Russians secured their naval base in Latakia and Tartus, and they give what the Turks and the Americans want in Syria, they could get what they want in Ukraine. So I think that there has been a deal, because it's illogical from the military sense that HTS convoys drove 300 kilometers from Idlib, basically on a highway. We're talking about highway which 4 cars can fit, and they were driving all the way on a highway, open air, to Damascus, and they were not targeted by the Air Force. It's not possible. It's the easiest. It's like rabbits. You can hunt them down, but it didn't happen. So I think this was the major reason. The second reason, I believe that the Syrian army didn't have the will to fight, because they were so demoralized after 2018. Between 2011 and 2018, there was an existential threat, and there was like a fight against terrorism. And then in 2018, they froze the Syrian conflict, and they put all these militants in Idlib. So the Syrian army was also, they didn't have clashes with the terrorists, active fighting. But during this time, because of the sanctions, people, 90% of the people were pushed under the poverty line due to the American sanctions. So Syrian soldiers are part of the Syrian people. So when the Syrian lira lost its value, there was like 1,000% inflation rate, then they can't afford the food and the bread and the milk for their children. So if you're a soldier and fighting for the Syrian army for $10 per month, or $20 per month, or $30 per month, then you're demoralized. You can't fight. On the other hand, the HTS militants, they receive $1,000 per month as a salary from Turkey, from Qatar, from the United States. So those are different factors. Like, if you're a soldier in the Syrian army and you want to fight against HTS, at least you have to have the high morals to fight. So the Syrian army, it seems that rejected to fight in this case, and they handed over weapons. There were so many places that they didn't fight, like Homs, Hama, Damascus. There was no fighting. So Assad fled the country.
I'm sure also they must have made some big deals with the military at the top and said, look, here's a nice chalet in Switzerland and lots of millions of pounds. Just tell your soldiers to drop their guards.
Yeah.
And the reality is, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, America, Britain, they've invested, 100 billion plus into the insurgency. This is a big investment. They were not going to walk away. They needed to win. And Bashar's now gone. It's very sad. I mean, look, some of the listeners might be thinking, well, this is all fascinating. What's this got to do with us in the West? Why should we care what happened to the Syrian people and their society and their civilization? And who cares? What would you say to the listeners here, in Ireland, in the north of England, in Texas, in California, in the Carolinas? Like, why the hell does this matter to them?
History doesn't belong. History and civilization are not exclusive to one people. The Syrian history is also the history of humanity. Syrian civilization is also the civilization of the humanity. If we belong to the same humanity, this means that one of the early civilizations, the traceable civilizations, goes back to Syria 7,000 years ago. And from here, the early agriculture started, the writing started, and some of the sciences started from this region in Mesopotamia and the Euphrates. And this has been exported later to Western civilizations, Western societies. So just like we now benefit from the technological advancement of the West in our countries, back then they used to benefit from our innovations in the region when the people were busy with innovations and not busy with religions and other stuff. So humanity is like we impact each other. It's not like if the Swiss advance in some microchip, this microchip will impact people in Far East Asia or in Latin America. This is all in a globalized world nowadays. Every action, interaction, it impacts everyone. So if you want to destroy one of the early civilizations, you're destroying your civilization, basically, because you benefited from this civilization to begin with. And if you turn Syria into a dark age era type of a country, this will reflect on the neighboring countries. So what do you want for the Middle East? Do you want for the Middle East to stay backward so that you can dominate over them politically? But what if Syria is now, it's the largest safe haven for Al-Qaeda terrorists since 9/11, and they are being legitimized. But there's going to be open border with Turkey, and Turkey is in Europe. Like Turkey has literal borders with Europe, with Greece, and we have experience from the past decade that Erdogan is willing to blackmail Europe and open the borders and say, "Oh, give me $8 billion, or I open my borders to the migrants and refugees to Europe." So imagine now the Tajiki, Uzbeki, Saudi, Uyghur, Chechen radicalized terrorists going to receive Syrian passport. And then what? So now they can come and apply for asylum in Europe. What's going to happen? Like it's from every side you look at it, it's bad. It's bad for the Syrian people. It's bad for the history of Syria, the civilization which is shared with the rest of humanity. And now Europe has borders basically with a terrorist-led government, because HDS and Turkey, they are in the same bed. And there is open border between Turkey and HDS-led border crossings. And they're going and coming back all the time. So if Turkey decides one day to go rogue against any country, like what stops them from sending these terrorists now to Armenia? They did already in 2020. They sent these terrorists to Nagorno-Karabakh to fight against the Armenians. So now we have a multinational contract army in the hands of Turkey, which can blackmail all the neighboring countries. If that is positive development for Europe, is it? No, it's not. For no one. And Turkey, Erdogan says he's a neo-Ottoman. Like he says that he wants to revive the neo-Ottomanism. This will have its reflections on the Caucasus, Central Asia, all the way to Crimea, all these Turkic tribes. They will feel emboldened. And this is another type of imperialist power is being cooked and prepared in the region. So this is a recipe for more conflict. Now, what do we need in the world nowadays? More stability or instability? If it's instability, then it will serve the elite, because then they will sell weapons But if it's stability, it will serve us all as humanity, right? The people, because if we developed in Syria, we have our industries, we have our products. We can also export. You can import. We export from you. We import from you.
And you have culture, and you have culture, and you have the arts, and you have peace, and you have love, and you have progress.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, listen, Kevork, last question of the day. It's my signature question. A long time from now, you're on your deathbed. You're surrounded by your loved ones, your children, your grandchildren. Before you die and meet your maker, what words of wisdom and advice would you want to impart on them if you haven't already told them, or you want to reinforce to them before you die?
Oh, wow, that's a very good question. Actually, life is too short. And I know that we get worried about lots of things, and rightfully so, but we are distracted so many, like most of our lives, we are distracted by outside distractions, and those are all manufactured for us to not focus on the important things in our lives. And especially in our relationship with our family, with our society, with our community, with our mutual growth. We're so distracted to think about just ourselves, our individualism, and our so-called successes and careers and everything, and then on the expense of the small, beautiful things in our lives, in family, in society. I think that there's so many beautiful things in life that is so simple that people do not even think about it. That we think this is, what is normal nowadays is not normal. Like, what is normal nowadays is not normal. Like, where we live nowadays in our small apartments without sunshine, without outside access to some nature, some waters. And then we go on vacation to some places and say, oh my God, I feel good. Yeah, you feel good because you're in nature. You're in front of the ocean. That's why you feel good. So I would really encourage people to think a little bit critically about everything they are being injected in their brains. Like we have become slaves. We become slaves into the extent that we agree to live in a 50 square meter apartment in front of electronics all the time without any sunshine, and work and work and work, and then pay more than half of our income as
90%.
tax. So
90%.
we are. Yeah, so we are slaves. This is the message that I'm trying to say. There is not much difference between us as modern slaves and the slaves in the past. They also used to give them bread, but now they print the money and they give us the money that they print to feed us, and then take away 50%, let's say, at least 60% of our money in taxes. So we are also slaves. I think anyone who is on the bed, who's going to pass away, I think it's very important for this person to have had enough time with his beloved ones, and who would have served his community in the best way possible. But in order to do that, this person has to break the chains first. If you can't break the chains, then you lived as a slave and you died as a slave, and you didn't benefit anyone. And I think this is a mutual responsibility, because we come and go, and then somebody else will after us will come, and in a generation or two everybody will forget us. But once you leave a positive impact on your children and grandchildren and on your society, they will also be encouraged to inherit these values to the future generations. So this is, in my opinion, mutual responsibility among us.
Wow. Thanks, man. Thank you, brother.
So much. Thank you so much.
I, Ahmed Malik, am a private civilian protected by the Geneva Convention. My Substack, social media posts, and podcasts are my personal experiences, observations, and opinions. This information is for educational purposes only. Although I am a doctor, I am not your doctor, and I am not providing medical or legal advice to you or to the wider public. I am not licensed or registered with the GMC or any other licensing board. The responsibility for the interpretation, due diligence, and use of the information from my Substack and my podcast lies with you, the viewer and/or listener. Please do your research and use your discernment. It is not my intention to harass, intimidate, offend, defame, conspire, blackmail, coerce, or cause anxiety, alarm, or distress to any man or woman, and the information presented here is done so with peaceful and honourable intentions. Enjoy, folks.